Awakened to life out of the night of unconsciousness, the will finds itself as an individual in an endless and boundless world, among innumerable individuals, all striving, suffering, and erring, and, as if through a troubled dream, it hurries back to the old unconsciousness. Before we chase the next dream, before we whisper another prayer into the void, ask yourself, what if life is not a gift, but a debt? What if our deepest joys are not triumphs, but traps? In today's journey, we won't be offering comfort, we'll be offering clarity. Welcome to the Will to Wisdom, where the illusions of the world are peeled back, and only the raw truth remains. But what if one of history's most brilliant minds looked at the same question, the same world, and answered with a definitive, unblinking no? What if, according to him, not only is life not worth living, but existence itself is characterized by a fundamental vanitya, pervasive suffering, and an inescapable, blind, and meaningless striving? Welcome back to the Will to Wisdom. Today, we're diving deep into the often challenging, yet profoundly insightful philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer. Known as the philosopher of pessimism, Schopenhauer dared to articulate a vision of the world that stood in stark contrast to the prevailing optimism of his time and arguably much of ours. His central work, The World as Will and Representation, lays bare a reality that, once seen, is impossible to unsee. It's a reality where happiness is illusion, pain is the only certainty, and our very essence is a relentless, irrational drive that ensures our perpetual dissatisfaction. In this video, we'll explore Schopenhauer's concept of the vanity of existence. We'll understand why he believed life is not a gift to be enjoyed, but a task to be endured. We'll examine the deep metaphysical reasons behind this grim assessment, drawing from his major works and essays like On the Suffering of the World and Purga and Paralipomena. This isn't going to be easy. It's not going to be comfortable. But it promises to offer a perspective on the human condition that is as honest as it is unsettling. By the end, while you may not embrace pessimism, you will walk away with a deeper, more nuanced understanding of the fundamental challenges of existence and perhaps a different kind of wisdom. So, if you're ready to confront the uncomfortable truths about the world and ourselves, stay with us. This is Video 7, The Vanity of Existence. Is Life Worth Living? Only on The Will to Wisdom. To understand Schopenhauer's view on the vanity of existence, we first need to grasp his fundamental philosophical framework. At its core, Schopenhauer presents the world from two distinct yet inseparable perspectives: the world as representation and the world as will. Think of it this way, and Schopenhauer himself often used analogies to clarify complex ideas. The world as representation is the world as it appears to us, the world structured by our minds. It's the world of objects in space and time, governed by the principle of cause and effect. It's the world we perceive through our senses, the world that science investigates, the world of individual things, distinct from one another. Our bodies, too, as objects in space and time, are part of this world of representation. From this perspective, life seems like a linear progression, a series of events, actions, and experiences occurring in sequence. We are subjects observing a world of objects. But this, for Schopenhauer, is only one side of the coin and the less fundamental one. Behind this perceived world of appearances lies the world as will. This is the inner essence, the true being in itself of all things, including ourselves. What is this will? It is not a rational faculty, not a thinking mind, not a divine being. It lacks cognition or consciousness in its pure form. It is a blind, ceaseless, irrational strivinga, raw impulsion, a driving force. Schopenhauer argues that our most immediate access to this will is through our own bodies, not just as objects we perceive, but as the subject of our willing. When we are conscious of ourselves from within, we are conscious of willing, not just deliberate decisions, but all our desires, needs, instincts, emotions, and even the involuntary functions of our body. These are all manifestations of the will within us. And just as our own inner striving is will, Schopenhauer contends that this same blind, striving will is the underlying essence of everything in the universe. The force that pulls a stone to the earth, the growth of a plant, the instinct of an animal, and the desires of a human being, these are all expressions of the same fundamental will, differing only in the degree of their objectification, their appearance in the world of representation. The world as will is fundamentally different from the world as representation. It exists outside the forms of space and time and is not subject to the principle of sufficient reason in the same way. Crucially, in the world as will, there are no separate individuals. What appears as many distinct things and people in the world of representation is, in itself, one undivided will. The principle that separates us, the principium individuationis, the principle of individuation based on space and time, applies only to appearances. This fundamental idea that we and everything else are ultimately manifestations of a single, blind, striving will is the bedrock of Schopenhauer's philosophy. And it is from this bedrock that his understanding of the vanity and suffering of existence flows. If our innermost essence and the essence of the world is this blind, ceaseless, striving will, what does that mean for our lives? According to Schopenhauer, it means that life, by its very nature, is defined by suffering and dissatisfaction. The will is a perpetual wantinga, constant desire born from a feeling of lack. We desire something precisely because we feel we do not have it. And this lack is inherently painful. When we achieve the object of our desire, is that happiness? Schopenhauer says, no. Satisfaction is merely the temporary cessation of pain. It's not a positive state in itself, but simply the removal of a negative one. And what happens after a desire is satisfied? Either new desires immediately arise to torment us with their non-fulfillment, or if they don't, we fall into the equally painful state of boredom. This is why, for Schopenhauer, life oscillates between pain and boredom. We are driven by want, and when we finally get what we think we want, the relief is short-lived. The cycle soon begins again, or worse, we're left hollow, facing the void of nothing left to want. Schopenhauer uses powerful analogies to illustrate this point. We are like Ixion, bound to a perpetually revolving wheel of striving, like the Danaids, pouring water endlessly into a bottomless sieve, like Tantalus, always reaching for satisfaction that retreats just beyond our grasp. And our life? It's like blowing a soap bubble. We inflate it with great hope, knowing all the while it must burst. This inherent dissatisfaction, this endless cycle of desire, brief relief, and new longing, or emptinesis, what constitutes the vanity, nichtigkeit, of existence. Life appears as a continual deception, a chain of hopes and promised pleasures that either end in disappointment or turn out to be hollow. We are, as Schopenhauer puts it, awakened to life out of the night of unconsciousness, only to be driven by unlimited desires and inexhaustible needs. trying in vain to fill the bottomless pit of the will's heart. But no possible satisfaction in the world can ever achieve this. Everything in life seems to declare that earthly happiness is destined to be frustrated or recognized as illusion. For Schopenhauer, this isn't just poetic pessimism, it is the structure of reality itself. Even the fleeting nature of time reveals this vanity. The present is the only real mode of existence, and yet it is constantly slipping away. Everything we attain, everything we experience, fades and comes to nothing. Our lives are a constant becoming, without being continually wishing, but never being satisfied. If pleasure were truly positive and pain merely its absence, then perhaps life would offer something genuinely desirable. But Schopenhauer insists, pain is primary, real, and undeniable. Pleasure is only the temporary suspension of pain, not a real substance of its own. Thus, life is not something to be cherished, but something to be endured, to be gone through, to be let go of. It is, as he puts it, not a gift, but a penalty. Not a joy, but a burden inflicted upon us. This grim picture, Schopenhauer says, is the inevitable consequence of being a manifestation of the blind, striving will. We suffer because we will, and we cannot stop willing as long as we exist as individuals. The suffering inherent in the blind striving of the will is compounded by our existence as separate individuals. The principium individuationis, the principle that makes us distinct from one another in space and time, is part of the world of representation. But fundamentally, the underlying will is one and undivided. Our sense of being a unique, separate self is, in a deep metaphysical sense, an illusion. This illusion of individuality leads inevitably to egoism. We naturally view ourselves as the center of the world, focusing on our own desires and well-being, often at the expense of others. This egoism fuels conflict, competition, and further suffering, both individually and collectively. Each individual regards him or herself as the center of the world, Schopenhauer observes. The human condition, then, is one of being a manifestation of a suffering will, trapped in the illusion of separateness, driven by ego, and constantly oscillating between the pain of unfulfilled desire and the emptiness of boredom. This suffering is not accidental, it is essential to all life, because will is our very essence. In this context, common human attitudes toward life appear deeply flawed. Optimism, the belief that this is the best of all possible worlds, or that life is fundamentally good, is, to Schopenhauer, a profound delusion. He famously challenges the optimist to visit hospitals, prisons, battlefields, and the dark dwellings of misery. After witnessing such suffering, he argues, even the optimist would come to see the true nature of the world. Perhaps even more striking is Schopenhauer's view on death. While most philosophies and religions frame death as a fearful unknown or spiritual transition, and see the fear of death as a central human concern, Schopenhauer pivots entirely. To him, the fear of death is less significant than the dread of life. Life itself is the burden. Life is the task. Life is the debt. Death is merely the return to the nothingness from which we can be a state that, when compared to a life full of suffering, might even be preferable. It would have been much better if it had been just as impossible for the sun to produce the phenomenon of life on Earth as on the moon. He writes, suggesting that a lifeless, crystalline planet might be better than one teeming with agony and desire. Life, for Schopenhauer, is a debt contracted at birth, a pensum to be worked through. And who contracts this debt? Not the child, but the parents, in what he bluntly calls the enjoyment of volupty. And the child? The child must live, suffer, and die to pay this debt. One of the most powerful manifestations of this blind, striving will and a key driver of the vanity of existence is what Schopenhauer calls the will to life, Will zum Leben. This isn't just the instinct for individual self-preservation. It is a fundamental metaphysical drive for existence to continue to perpetuate itself through an infinite succession of generations. And the most direct, concentrated expression of this will to life is the sexual instinct. Schopenhauer argues that the sexual organs are the focal point of the will. It is through this drive that the will most powerfully asserts its pushing life forward, regardless of the suffering it causes. Nature, in its relentless pursuit of species preservation, uses this instinct to fulfill its aim, often by deceiving the individual. This is where Schopenhauer's metaphysics of sexual love comes. In a truly unique and controversial part of his philosophy, he argues that what we experience as love, attraction, or passionate longing for another person is, in its deepest metaphysical sense, merely the will to life of a future individual trying to come into being. That intense chemistry, the sense that one particular person is your destiny, is not about your personal happiness. It is the unconscious will of the species, selecting what it sees as the optimal genetic combination for the next generation. The longing, the sacrifice, the idea that this one person will bring me eternal happiness is, according to Schopenhauer, the illusion created by the will. We believe we're chasing joy or fulfillment, but in truth, we are instruments, blindly serving the species' goal. The real objective is not love, not happiness, but the composition of the future generation. And once that goal is achieved, once procreation happens, or even the possibility of it disappears, the illusion fades. Often suddenly, what once felt sacred becomes mundane, even repulsive. This, Schopenhauer says, explains why so many marriages based on passionate love collapse. The bond was never about long-term compatibility. It was about the metaphysical urgency of creating a specific child. When that aim is fulfilled or denied, the passion evaporates, revealing two people who may have little in common beyond that fleeting instinct. This relentless, deceptive drive to preserve the species seven at the cost of the individual's joy, freedom, or well-being is another expression of the vanity of existence. We are born, driven to desire, compelled to reproduce, burdened to suffer, and then discarded to perpetuate the same cycle for the next generation. The drama repeats. The names and faces change, but the script remains the same. Schopenhauer's philosophy is often abstract, but he grounds it in sharp observations and illustrates it with compelling, sometimes disturbing, real-world examples. Let's look at a few that reveal how these ideas play out in reality, or at least in the world as he saw and described it, based on the sources available to us. Perhaps one of the most vivid examples, which deeply impacted Schopenhauer in his youth and became a potent metaphor throughout his work, is the Toulon penal colony in France. As a teenager, during a trip with his family's business associate, Schopenhauer visited Toulon and witnessed the harrowing conditions of the prisoners. Shackled, malnourished, and forced into hard labor, their lives were a portrait of profound misery and suffering. He later described their fate as far more terrible than a death sentence. For Schopenhauer, the penal colony became a powerful allegory for life itself. It wasn't just the fate of those men that disturbed him, it was what they represented. Life, like Toulon, is a place of universal need, restless exertion, constant pressure, endless strife, and forced activity. Millions struggle for themselves, and for some supposed greater good, but countless souls fall as a sacrifice to it. The physical chains and relentless toil of the penal colony symbolized, for him, the inescapable bonds of the will and the suffering it imposes on the individual. It was this early encounter with raw human suffering that helped shape Schopenhauer's view that the dread of life is more profound than the fear of death. The suffering he witnessed wasn't an accident of life, it was, in his eyes, a defining feature of it. Let's now return to the will to life, particularly the sexual instinct, and explore how it operates independently of rational, conscious will, often with tragic consequences. Schopenhauer sees this clearly in the animal kingdom. Take, for example, the drone bee. Its sole biological purpose is to impregnate the queen. After mating, the drone dies. The worker bees then kill off the remaining drones that failed to fulfill this task. These creatures are driven by instinct to serve the species, and once their usefulness ends, they are discarded without ceremony. To Schopenhauer, this is a stark, naive expression of nature's value system. The species matters, the individual does not. He provides other animal examples as well. There are insects that seek out specific flowers or larvae to lay their eggs, operating with precision as if they understand what they're doing, yet no conscious thought is involved. Their behavior mimics purpose, but it's pure instinct, the will acting blindly. Or consider mountain goats or donkeys during mating season. In a frenzy of desire, they sometimes ignore danger, even leap to their deaths completely overridden by the sexual instinct. Here, even the fundamental drive for self-preservation is temporarily suspended because the will to life of the species takes precedence. In humans, the same instinct operates, though veiled by reason and complex emotions like love. But the underlying drive remains unchanged. Schopenhauer cites numerous examples of romantic passion, leading individuals to ignore all reason, sacrificing wealth, honor, even life itself. He mentions Werther and Jacopo, Ortis literary characters whose unfulfilled love ends in suicide. Sources also reference Romeo and Juliet. These are not just tragic stories to him. They are manifestations of the will to live, specifically of a particular future individual striving to come into existence, overriding all other considerations within the potential parents. And when this specific connection is blocked, the will within them is frustrated in its most essential aim, resulting in despair, madness, and sometimes self-destruction. Schopenhauer notes that suicides caused by thwarted love occur every year across Europe. Sometimes, this drive doesn't lead to death, but it reveals itself in quieter but equally profound ways. He observes the shame and secrecy that surrounds sexual acts. Why, he asks, is a biological function necessary for the continuation of the species often hidden and sometimes viewed with repulsion in calmer moments? For him, this unconscious shame signals a faint recognition of the guilt of perpetuating existence, a world that is fundamentally suffering, a debt passed on to another life. The first sexual act, in particular, is often followed by an unexpected sadness or even repentance. In contrast, pregnancy is often met with pride, but Schopenhauer interprets this not as pride in the act of creation itself, but in offering the possibility of intelligence, redemption, or release to the new individual through the mother's being. Even in his personal life, the messiness of romantic relationships seem to reinforce his view. The sources mention a letter from a woman named Teresa Fuga, addressed to Schopenhauer, written in broken Italian, full of romantic intrigue and mention of multiple lovers. While not tragic, it reveals the confusion, miscommunication. The suffering he witnessed wasn't an accident of life, it was, in his eyes, a defining feature of it. Let's now return to the will to life, particularly the sexual instinct, and explore how it operates independently of rational, conscious will, often with tragic consequences. Schopenhauer sees this clearly in the animal kingdom. Take, for example, the drone bee. Its sole biological purpose is to impregnate the queen. After mating, the drone dies. The worker bees then kill off the remaining drones that failed to fulfill this task. These creatures are driven by instinct to serve the species, and once their usefulness ends, they are discarded without ceremony. Given this bleak picture, is there any hope? Does Schopenhauer offer us anything more than despair? Surprisingly, yes. While he offers no path to conventional happiness, he does suggest ways to navigate suffering and perhaps even arrive at a different kind of inner peace. But that peace doesn't come from changing the world. It comes from changing our relationship to the will within us. One path is through aesthetic contemplation. When we truly engage with art or the beauty, given this bleak picture, is there any hope? Does Schopenhauer offer us anything more than despair? Surprisingly, yes. While he offers no path to conventional happiness, he does suggest ways to navigate suffering and perhaps even arrive at a different kind of inner peace. But that peace doesn't come from changing the world. It comes from changing our relationship to the will within us. One path is through aesthetic contemplation. When we truly engage with art or the beauty of nature not as consumers, but as quiet observers, we enter a state of pure, disinterested awareness. In that state of will, less consciousness, we escape, however briefly, from the cycle of striving and pain. In these moments, we glimpse the Platonic, timeless archetypes that underlie all fleeting appearances. This contemplation acts as a kind of tranquilizer for the will. Schopenhauer calls it the Sabbath of the penal servitude of willing. For him, music holds a special power because it speaks not to the world of appearances, but directly to the will itself. It bypasses language. It bypasses reason. It reveals something essential and universal, though. It does not silence suffering. It offers a rare, intuitive understanding of its nature. Another, more moral path is compassion or mitleid. When we begin to see the same suffering, will in others that moves within us, egoism breaks down. We no longer see ourselves as isolated individuals. We feel others' pain as our own. This shared recognition doesn't come from doctrine, it comes from experience. And it forms the basis for a kind of ethical awareness that transcends rules. It is grounded in empathy, in the truth that we are all manifestations of the same blind will. But the ultimate path, the only true redemption, is the denial of the will to life. This is not suicide. In Schopenhauer's view, suicide still affirms the will. It is the destruction of the appearance, the body, but not the drive itself. Denial is different. It is a turning away from willing itself. It is born of deep metaphysical insight into the suffering nature of existence and the illusory nature of individuality. This insight causes the will to recoil from its own striving. The result is not annihilation, but a kind of spiritual stillness, a voluntary willlessness, Willenlosigkeit. The individual may turn to asceticism, silence, detachment, or chastity not out of moral superiority, but because they no longer desire. Schopenhauer sees parallels in the mystical saints of Christianity, the renunciates of Hinduism, and the quiet surrender of Buddhist monks. In these figures, he sees not just virtue, but a kind of metaphysical clarity. They've understood not through abstract argument, but through lived insight that striving leads to suffering, and that freedom begins when the will finally falls silent. This state is rare, difficult, unstable. It requires continuous discipline, and often exists on the edge of what ordinary minds perceive as madness. But to Schopenhauer, it is the only true liberation. Not pleasure, not fulfillment, but an inner emptiness that is finally, mercifully free. From the perspective of the world, it may look like nothing, but to the one who has seen through the illusion, it is everything. So, having explored Schopenhauer's profound, challenging, and often uncomfortable philosophy, where do we land on the original question? Is life worth living? From the perspective of his core system, the answer seems starkly clear. No. Life, as a manifestation of the blind, suffering will, is inherently full of pain, unsatisfiable, striving, and fundamental vanity. Happiness, as a positive and lasting state, is an illusion. We are driven by forces beyond our rational control, compelled to perpetuate a cycle of suffering not for ourselves, but for a species that is itself just another fleeting appearance of the restless will. Life is a debt, a task, a game with high stakes but a hollow prize. Schopenhauer is not offering comfort, nor is he suggesting that you despair or end your life. So, what lessons can we take from Schopenhauer's perspective on the vanity of existence? These are not feel-good tips but profound insights for navigating a difficult world. 1. Manage expectations. If happiness is endless, pleasurous, an illusion, then perhaps wisdom lies in seeking tranquility, the absence of pain, or simply a bearable present. Lowering our expectations can soften suffering. Great pleasures often carry the risk of great pain. The trade-off may not be worth it. 2. Understand the drive. Recognizing the blind will and its relentless striving within use, especially the will to life and the sexual instinct, offers clarity. When we see how attraction and reproduction are driven by unconscious forces, we may begin to temper our expectations about love, relationships, and fulfillment. This awareness, for Schopenhauer, can act as a tranquilizer, reducing the violent pull of desire. 3. Cultivate inner resources. External validation, material success, or social approval are fleeting. What truly matters is who you are. Your character, intellect, and inner strength. Developing your mind, nourishing your inner world, and pursuing creative or philosophical interests can offer a refuge from the chaos of desire and the boredom of daily life. 4. Embrace a form of detachment. You don't need to become a monk, but understanding detachment can bring freedom. Even brief moments of will-less contemplation, whether through nature, art, or solitude, can provide peace deeper than pleasure. Detach from outcomes. Observe desire without obeying it. 5. Recognize shared suffering. Compassion breaks the illusion of separation. When we see others as fellow sufferers, each moved by the same restless will, we move toward empathy, not judgment. We begin to connect at a deeper level beyond ego. 6. value the question, not just the answer. Schopenhauer doesn't give easy answers, but he asks the hardest questions with unwavering honesty. And sometimes, wisdom lies not in comfort, but in the courage to look unflinchingly at life's hardest truths. The journey of understanding, for those of us on the will to wisdom, is the purpose itself. Schopenhauer's philosophy is not for the faint of heart. It shakes the foundations of our assumptions about happiness, meaning, and the value of existence. But in confronting the potential vanity of life, we gain a kind of Claridian, austere, unsettling wisdom that comes from seeing clearly. It's a call to awaken not to illusion, but to truth. And perhaps, in that clear-eyed seeing, there is a freedom that no lie could ever offer. If this exploration challenged your assumptions or sparked a deeper curiosity within, I invite you to stay part of this conversation. Leave a comment with your reflections, like the video if it stirred your mind, and subscribe for more fearless journeys into the truth. Until then, walk gently, think deeply, and as always, keep walking toward wisdom. Share your insights below. Is life worth living, even in the face of suffering? If you found value here, like the video and share it with someone who's asking life's harder questions. And don't forget to subscribe to The Will to Wisdom for more deep journeys into the minds that shaped human thought. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and never stop walking toward wisdom.